Morning. So all those out in the hallway, if you could just make your way in. And welcome to day 2 of ADRIC 2015, Big Sky, Big Ideas in ADR. And thanks this morning to FTI Consulting for sponsoring this great breakfast. So big thank you to FTI Consulting. And thanks to all of our sponsors. You'll see their names on the side for sponsoring this event. We could not hold this conference without their support. It's my pleasure to introduce a very special member who holds the Qualified Mediator designation along with his many other credentials. We're in for a real treat this morning as we all get to spend some time listening to a very special person. The Honourable Robert Wanner has graciously agreed to share some of his thoughts and insights with us. After 40 years of public and community service, when most people are looking to spend some time with their grandchildren, those grandchildren recognize that their grandpa had a huge contribution to make to Alberta. The end result is a last-minute run for office, election as an MLA, representing the constituents in Medicine Hat, Alberta, and appointment as a Speaker for the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. Despite his busy schedule, the Honourable Robert Wanner has taken the time to meet with the ADR community this summer through a personal invitation to myself and our Executive Director, Paul Conway. We met in his office, and during our meeting, which went well into overtime, his passion for service to the people of Alberta and his commitment to bring the ADR perspective to the legislature and all other aspects of government was plainly evident. It is my pleasure to introduce a fellow member of the ADR Institute of Canada and the ADR Institute of Alberta, the Honourable Robert Wanner.
Good morning. I'll make one correction, and it's ironic that he should use that word, but at the time that the Premier nominated me to be the Speaker of the House, one of the media referred to it as an appointment, and they had a little bit of fun with that. In actual fact, it's an election by the House rather than the nomination of the Premier. But I suspect, however, that partisanship may have crept into that in some people's minds on occasions. It's a privilege for me to be here this morning, and I guess my first message, as I was jotting it down in the events of my life, which I'll touch on a little bit later, welcome to not only the province but also the country of change. We have confidence as a nation to move in innovative directions, and I think we all, as Canadians of all colors, need to celebrate that faith that we have in each other as citizens. I am really humbled to be here because speaking about dispute resolution in front of a crowd much the size and quality of this, I am certain that the expertise before me far exceeds my own. Every person has their own story to weave, and they often gain satisfaction from to tell it. When they are heard, truly heard, the probability of reaching a resolution to dispute increases dramatically. People want, I have to get some water, excuse me. That's another phenomena that there seems to be a dryness in the voice, comes with the color of this hair. This experience that I'm going through is similar to what you folks deal with on a daily basis. People not only want, but they also need to tell their stories. And the Legislative Assembly is no exception to that rule. My wife tells me that I don't listen, I just wait my turn to speak. So just as a lead into this, let me tell you a little bit about my story and its almost comedic circumstances. In my particular constituency, we were about 8 or 9 days into the already called election, and the local candidate who had been nominated several months before had found it necessary to resign as the nominee. It was a Sunday night, and I think we had been away, and I received a call from the Premier asking if I might, she was not yet a Premier at the point, and she asked me if I would consider stepping in. I have 4 daughters, we have 4 daughters that live across this province, and our 11 grandchildren, which Stan referred to. There was a series of texts and emails that went across and around and through this province for the next 24 hours. And the ultimate circumstances, the council consulted with each other, and it was determined that the worst case scenario is that I might win. Little did they know that the circumstances that would see, and you go through these events, it really is quite an experience. You go through these events, and that particular night and the events after was, well, gee whiz, we might get official opposition status, and then we said we might have a minority government here, and then we had a majority government, and I thought maybe that was it was over, but the events in the next several weeks saw my life change so dramatically that I ended up wearing a black robe and sitting in a legislature of 87 very committed and well-deserved people who had worked very hard to be there. I must also add a little flavor to that. I'm privileged and honored to have my mother, who's 97 years of age, turns 98 next month, still lives by herself. My daughters were having a hard time, giving her a hard time and saying, you know, Grandma, she's now that he's Speaker, he's going to get to meet royalty. And they said, my mother, who is a monarchist a long ways back, said, you'll really get to meet a princess? And I said, no, that's not the case. They're just giving you a hard time. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's a surreal aspect of this life of mine, last night I hosted a reception for the Princess of Belgium in this city. So it is a very, very surreal experience that I and my family have been on. My personal background as a social worker, an executive officer in local government, a mediator both in family, civil, and various other aspects of mediation, conflict resolution, municipalities. By the way, I would particularly like to acknowledge some of my friends from municipal affairs, and for I see faces here. Paula, how are you? Jim? I see faces that I was involved with on the board. But I want to acknowledge an old friend who's had renewed my contact with me. My friend is Rick Ossinger. He and I were doing a number of mediations together, and our friendship goes back over some 40-plus years. So I wanted to acknowledge Rick here today. This experience that I've had has provided me with the privilege of working with all sorts of people through various stages of dispute and dispute resolution. What I'm starting to realize now is how valuable these experiences are in my new role as the MLA and as the Speaker of the Alberta Legislative Assembly. As MLAs, our primary role is to represent constituents. We represent those who not only voted for us in the last election, but those who didn't, and even those who didn't vote. We are often consulted, reached out to during times of conflict or dispute, when our constituents are trying to navigate certain issues and need someone to advocate on their behalf. Whether it's the farmer dealing with crop disease, the community in need of a school, the individual having a conflict with worker compensation, or the senior citizen accessing health care, the owner wanting to expand his business, these are critical issues that require a lot of attention. We need to realize, I need to realize and learn in dealing with that as an MLA. It's popular to say, as we know in politics, we need to cut through the red tape. It's my experience that we need to remember, however, that one man's red tape is another person's protection. And so as we break or consider breaking that rule, we need to remind ourselves of that. No two disputes are actually the same. Yet the basic root of all conflicts comes from the individual desire to be listened to and to be heard to tell their story. We mediators have all heard the story illustration from Mediation 101 about two people fighting over an orange. Both people are very convincing in their arguments about why they are most deserving of the orange. Both parties are very wrapped up in presenting and sometimes assertively their side of the story. But if we and they were to stop and realize and listen to each other's story more often, they would realize that one of them only wants the peel and the other one only wants the juice. So it is a win-win. As the Speaker of the House, I preside over disputes about a lot of oranges. In Chapter 6 of the Inter-Parliamentary Union's Guide on Parliament and Democracy, it says, a distinctive aspect of Parliament and legislature's role in promoting national and provincial integration lies in the contribution it can make to conflict resolution. Parliaments and legislatures constitute a site for resolving political disagreement through the democratic means of dialogue and compromise. As such, they have a valuable role to play in helping resolve wider disagreements and conflict within our society. Of course, such conflicts can be reflected and even intensified by the party competition within the legislature, especially where this takes on a stronger partisan or winner-take-all character. And I can tell you, at its highest level, the challenges that all legislatures have is the collective sense of the Assembly and of the partisan interests of groups within the Assembly. As an MLA, it is critical that we, and I as an MLA and the staff who work for me, actively listen to the people we represent. While it is impossible for us to always agree with all of our constituents, as many of them will have conflicting views, it is imperative that we hear their stories and that we firstly and most fundamentally show respect for their point of view. When our constituents come to us with opposing, I'm usually not this, it must have been maybe too much of the wine last night with the princess. Yeah. We drank Canadian wine, not Belgian wine. It becomes our job to try and figure out a resolution that will support the needs of the many while still respecting the needs of the few. This is not always an easy task and one that can find us in conflict with some of our constituents. As Speaker, I am still an MLA. I represent, and I must tell you, I represented very aggressively and assertively with the ministers in our Premier's cabinet. I am perhaps, however, more of an arbitrator than a mediator. Conflict over resolutions was a colorful part of the Speaker's tyrannical beginnings, dating back to the earliest parliaments of Britain over 600 years ago. The Speaker's job as the first commoner was to advise the monarch on resolutions of the Parliament. However, if the monarch did not particularly care for those resolutions that the Assembly had prepared, they could remove the Speaker from office and simply have the Speaker's head cut off. It is believed that no fewer than 9 speakers were executed in the performance of their duties. It's not exactly an incentive for accepting the position. Thankfully, the role of Speaker has evolved far beyond what it once was. Had it not, I may not be there. Quite literally, I may not be here. Today, the job is somewhat more dignified, although the election of a Speaker still pays homage to its rather scandalous past. Today, a Speaker is elected in the members of the Assembly. There is still some vulnerability to that partisanship, but it is a democratic process, and all 87 members on a non-party basis get to vote. Following the election, the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition dragged the Speaker to the chair, seemingly against his or her will, and in an essence, forcing them to take the position. Even today, though the legislature still uses what may be perceived as adversarial symbols, the ceremonial staff symbolizing the authority of the Legislative Assembly is a mace, a weapon of war. The members sitting across from the governing party are always stamped with the official term of opposition. And it is exactly 2 sword lengths across from each other. And we do not have votes in the legislature, we have divisions. Sometimes the impact of words we use, and you folks probably more appropriately than any of the disciplines know how the impact of words can be both a pro and a con to successful resolution. That being said, I believe that most great ideas are born from debate, and that the very essence of a solid, thoughtful debate is often derived from conflict or dispute. Opposing sides attempting to gain support or influence behavioral change. I wonder what would happen if the focus was less on winning the argument and more on finding the solution or compromise. As Speaker, I am not allowed to participate in the debate, much like a mediator, nor can I ask or answer questions during oral question periods. As Speaker, I do not vote on matters before the Assembly only under extremely rare circumstance when another vote is needed to break a tie. That has only happened twice in Alberta's legislative history. As I abbreviate my comments at this very early hour, I shall slip that one past and say, you see sometimes when speakers have to move from managing the debate or dispute to actually becoming part of it in an effort to reach resolution, it only adds to the existing conflict. It is real or perceived. It is an awkward position to be put in while serving in a non-partisan capacity. One of the former speakers who I consulted with all and many across this country in the preparation and continue to do the consultation. And I must tell you, regardless of what partisan influence they have, I have received nothing but absolute respect, assistance, and advice from those people, and I respect them very much for doing that. One of them said to me, you are about to accept the loneliest job in the legislature, and it is sometimes true. In the legislature, there are 87 seats reserved for men and women who have been elected to represent the various interests of over 4 million people living in our province. Obviously, each of those members and the public they represent bring with them varied opinions on countless subjects being debated in the House. And I must tell you a couple of thoughts that I think the Premier would want me to mention. Probably the Leader of the Opposition would also agree with her. Her government, I think, if I recall, had the highest number of women in her caucus. And they now, with the new minister, just added recently, as of last week, the women in her cabinet are more than 50%. We also have a 20-year-old young gentleman and another one who is 21. I must tell you a little joke, and I hope I don't steal my time, but the very first night that the caucus came together after the election, we were standing around a table like this, eating some pizza and drinking some beer, and this young man the topic came up, what are we earning at this job? What kind of money do we get? And somebody said, well, what we were going to receive, and young Thomas said, and he looked around the table, I could move out of my parents' basement. I must tell you, I've heard him speak in the legislature several times, as I acknowledge him. He is going to be a very exceptional, he already is, but he is going to be an exceptional representative for the city of Edmonton. As a Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, my job is to preside over the debate and ensure all voices are heard and ensure that arguments are presented with a certain amount of decorum and respect, trying to manage the place so it can find its own balance. It's one of the most difficult challenges. At what point do you intervene? We seem to have two conflicting perspectives. On one hand, you have people these 87 people who are saying, we need to engage with each other, so don't allow us to do that. And that includes some of the comments that fly across the House. The other end of that pendulum is a public that seems to be saying, in my own constituency and whenever I am out, why don't you get a hold of those guys? Make them smarten up, be quiet. And it's that conflicting balance. So you have to, experienced legislators have told me, allow the place to find its own balance. And that's the process I'm going through right now. It's a position, I'll just skip over that, to borrow again from a former speaker, Mr. Amarankan. I never had the opportunity to meet with him. As the presiding officer his quote is, as the presiding officer of the highest authority in the province, the Speaker does not in any way sit in judgment on the Assembly, the opposition, or the government. He is still one of the MLAs, but to the special duty of applying rules to assist the House in getting its work done. Assist the House. I am the servant to the House, to all other 86. The same sentiment could really apply in the management of most disputes. What are the rules? Are there precedents? And what does common sense tell us? What a novel idea, common sense. There are essentially three sort of principles, rules, precedents, and that common sense. Let's start with the rules. In presiding over debates of the House, the Speaker is governed by a number of authorities. The standing orders of the Legislative Assembly. These are committees have worked on, and we agree these are the principles, the procedures, the practices we're going to operate by in our, quote, mediation. And there are several documents of some national and international, going back to the Westminster Rules, Erskine's May's Treatise on the Law, the Beauchesne's Rules and Forms of the House of Commons of Canada. And I must tell you, each of those books are about this thick. And I did not have a very interesting summer reading through those. The standing orders are permanent rules under which the Legislative Assembly and its committees conduct business. The House of Commons Procedure and Practice and Erskine's May's Parliamentary Practice are comprehensive collections of the practice within the House, the function and proceedings of the Parliament and legislatures, and citations often referred to as authorities in the parliamentary practice. Every morning I sit prior to the legislature with some, to all due respect to the very many lawyers who were in the room, I sit every morning for about an hour with 3 or 4 legislative lawyers. And they will take me through issues that may arise. And I can tell you 2 and 2 never does make 4 in those equations. It's always 4.2 or 5.6. It's very different. And by the way, even though I've sat there for some 6 months, you must appreciate the nonpartisan aspect of this. In spite of, even in those closed-door meetings, at my requests numerous times, my name is Bob, they continuously say, I'm sorry, you are Mr. Speaker, whether in the room or in that legislature. It reflects the culture of that place. Speaker rulings are required when deciding, how close am I getting? Am I stealing into your time? I'm going to jump ahead. Too many pauses. Rules, precedents, and common sense, combined with our own personal system of beliefs, won't resolve every dispute we encounter, but I do believe it will help to approach each issue with clarity and a sense of purpose. Therefore, to one of my initial questions, I'm not sure if I'm a mediator, an arbitrator, or something else. Sometimes a listener, sometimes, but very seldom an active participant. There was a movie recently called something related to the inconvenient. I sometimes feel in the legislature that I'm an inconvenient MLA, because as you watch it going back and you allow the place to reach its balance, it does take, for someone like me, as you know, who likes to speak too much, it is very, very difficult and challenging to not intervene yourself in that process. I can only close, and my apologies for taking longer. I leave you with a final thought. It's actually an excerpt from a prayer. And by the way, the standing orders still say in this legislature that we are required to say a prayer. It has become a reflection. As a side note, I noticed when we were at the swearing-in ceremony, as part of our nation changes, I would have estimated that at least 75% and probably more of the MLAs who were elected, they did not swear an oath, they were an affirmation. So we are a changing Canada. Aren't we lucky? Aren't we fortunate to have that? And aren't we lucky to have institutions that do have a tradition that goes back over some 600 years that helps us muddle through this place we call our world. I'll leave you with this, two thoughts. It was a prayer that I used. That is a nice little thing. I do like to write these on occasion. As we commence proceedings today in this assembly, let us think about and contemplate our opportunity to once again work together, to find a way in which our collective efforts will make our world and our province better, to find hope, not fear, to cooperate, not compete, to be inclusive, not exclusive, to share, not to keep. I get the opportunity and privilege to speak to many young people in the province in this position. I try, particularly with them, but also with all of us, even with some of us who have this color hair, my message is, dream no little dreams. Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here.
Thank you, Bob, for sharing your surreal journey with us. Mr. Speaker, your insights and wisdom are obvious and will serve the people of Alberta well over many years. Thank you so much for taking time and stealing away from the princess to come and spend the time with the likes of us. It's greatly appreciated, and here's a token of our appreciation.
Oh, it's very kind. Thank you very much.